Good morning and welcome to Santos on Sports. We hope you are warm and dry on this snow-filled Saturday morning. Alongside Chris Santos, I am Paul Santos. We are so pleased to have as a special guest here a gentleman who is originally from New Bedford. His career has taken him all the way to the Boston Globe as a sports writer focusing in on baseball. We welcome to the show Mr. Peter Abraham. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
Hey guys, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'll tell you, we're going to get into all the juicy stuff. Who's in the Hall of Fame, who didn't make the Hall of Fame, steroids, baseball writers, who they voted for, who they didn't vote for, and why, and all that juicy stuff. Should the writers even be doing it at all that kind of stuff. But first, we want to get the resume of Peter Abraham. He's a guy that grew up right here in our great city of New Bedford and made his way up the ranks and has been with the Boston Globe for a number of years. How does a guy who grew up in New Bedford, who dreamed of being a big-time sports writer, go from here all the way to the Boston Globe?
Yeah, well, I actually didn't dream of being a big-time sports writer. I had a part-time job at the Standard Times when I was in high school, went to New Bedford High, and that was my goal. I wanted to, live in my hometown and cover New Bedford High. One of the biggest games I covered when I was a kid was a New Bedford Durfee basketball game. I thought that would be what I'd want to do. And when I got out of college, I went to UMass and studied journalism. And when I got out of college, they didn't have a job available. I was working part-time. And my dad, was basically like, hey, you're out of college. You need to get a job. So I started looking around and I ended up in Watertown, New York, which is about 5 miles from the Canadian border. And it was you think we got snow today. This was a flurry for them. And when I was there for a little bit and then I got offered a job in Norwich, Connecticut, which is not too far over the Rhode Island border. And it was a great job. I ended up covering UConn basketball. I went all over the country covering them, and that led eventually to a job in Westchester, New York, Westchester County, New York. I went there as a general assignment reporter in 1999. I ended up covering the Mets, and then I ended up covering the Yankees. And then the Boston Globe gave me a call. They were expanding their website. They wanted somebody who was familiar with the website, the content for a website, which is what I had been doing a lot of in New York. I went to the Globe in 2009, and I've been there ever since. I'm now their national baseball columnist. I've been covering the Red Sox that whole time, obviously, in Major League Baseball matters. So I never thought it would, end up at the Globe. That was one of the papers I grew up reading, and it's a great honor to get to work, at a place where where Peter Gammons covered the Red Sox, and my late friend Nick Cafardo, and I get to work with some great people and go to Fenway Park. Fenway Park's my office, so you can't do much better than that. So.
See that, Paul? Even in journalism, the Red Sox stealing people from the Yankees to get them on, to get them where they want them to be.
Well, I will say though that covering the Yankees was great. It was a tremendous time. Joe Torre was the manager. I covered, Jeter, Mariano, all of those guys. It was really great. It was like covering the Rolling Stones. Everywhere you went, it was a huge event. So covering the Yankees. And covering the Red Sox, not too many people have done both of those. So it's been, I've been really fortunate to get to do that.
By the way, we are taking your calls at 774-301-9432. We have our special guest, Peter Abraham, native of New Bedford from the Boston Globe.
Peter, let's talk about today's baseball. And obviously we're talking about the lockout. And that's probably difficult for you right now. What have you been doing with yourself this winter with what's going on, and what do you see coming out right now, how baseball is looking for this year?
I would say my winter has been two things. I've taken up a lot of vacation time, and I've been covering David Ortiz going into the Hall of Fame.
Right.
And I'm out of vacation time, and David Ortiz isn't getting into the Hall of Fame until July. So, the lockout needs to end soon. And what's been weird about it is they won't let anybody talk to us. The team executives can't talk to us. The players can't talk to us. No. Everybody's kind of on media silence. It's a very strange thing. So you got to get creative trying to come up with baseball stories. And, they have met recently. It seems like they're making progress. I can't imagine they'd be dumb enough to let some of the season slip by and miss games. I mean, that would be, such a dumb thing to do. It would alienate so many fans. I would hope that they wouldn't get to a point where that would happen. I'm confident that they won't. But this is usually the time of the year I'm getting ready to go to spring training, and I'm not getting ready to go to spring training. So hopefully that'll happen soon.
Well, we got a comment here from Bruce David who said Peter actually coached at Whaling City Youth Baseball from 1980 to 1984 with his uncle. And when he was playing, they played him in the finals in 1982. Great guy, says Mr. Bruce David. So that's some trip down memory lane there.
Yeah, Whaling City, DeMello's Produce. I was one of the coaches. That was a good time. Yeah.
All right, let's get into the Hall of Fame a little bit. A lot of controversy here. I imagine, are you a voting member, first of all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been voting for 11 years.
All right, so all this thing about, okay, A-Rod's not in, and Roger Clemens isn't in, and of course Curt Schilling, another situation. But you have the steroids and the anti-steroids, and then you have Dan Shaughnessy coming out so strongly, giving a strong argument against David Ortiz. Hey, he's in his late 20s, he's basically fading. All of a sudden, he comes out of nowhere. He's connected to this, exercise person who is got some shadiness in the background. All of a sudden, he plays all the way to 40, hitting all kind of home runs and everything. What's your view on all of that? And how did you end up voting? Are you able to say?
Oh, yeah. We had everybody in the globe wrote about our votes and absolutely. I voted for David. I voted for Bonds and Clemens. I voted for Scott Rowland and Billy Wagner. I don't vote for A-Rod and Manny Ramirez because they failed tests after the testing was put in. So when I look at the steroids era, I look at when they started testing in 2004, and everybody knew that the steroids era had pretty much come to an end at that point. That the rules had changed, and that if you got caught, you were going to get punished. So that's where I draw my line. If you fail the test, I'm not going to vote for you. Now, before that, I look at the game in context. That there was a lot of offense in the game at that time. 500 home runs didn't mean what it used to mean. High numbers of RBIs didn't mean what they used to mean. So I don't vote for Sammy Sosa. I don't vote for Gary Sheffield. I look at who were the best players from that time, and I vote for them. And in terms of Curt Schilling, I've always voted for Curt Schilling because I believe he's a Hall of Fame pitcher. You look at the big games that he pitched. You look at his strikeout to walk ratio. You look at the fact that he pitched during the steroid era and had those great numbers. I've always thought he was a Hall of Famer. Now, he has said a lot of pretty terrible things. But I don't look at it like that has anything to do with his Baseball Hall of Fame candidacy. I'm looking at who he was as a pitcher. And a year ago, he would have been in the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago if he hadn't said any of those things. And last year, he got to 71%, which is obviously very high and very close to the 75% you need. As soon as he got to 71%, he came out with a statement that said all the writers are morally decrepit, all of them, even though 71% voted for him. And he said, take my name off the ballot, which the Hall of Fame wouldn't do. Well, guess what? A lot of writers said, well, you want your name off the ballot? I won't vote for you. If he hadn't said that, he would be in the Hall of Fame today. But I still voted for him anyway. I felt it was the right thing to do. But to be honest with you, I'm glad he's off the ballot because it's been a thorn in my side for 10 years. So, now we move on to other guys, and it'll be a lot more about baseball next year instead of Curt Schilling and steroids. It'll be back to talking about baseball.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Now, am I saying it right? You are the head of the committee of the BBWA?
No. I'm one of the members of you have to have 10 years as a BBWA member to vote.
Okay.
So I have a vote. I'm actually on the committee that puts together the ballot.
Okay.
But that's the only committee that there is.
Oh, that's the committee. Okay. That's what I wanted to straighten out there. Can you tell the audience and us a little bit about the criteria to make up this Hall of Fame? How much is it changed at all? Is the person itself maybe along with baseball, but their background and obviously their attitude and how they act off the field a big part as well?
Well, I can tell you, we get a ballot. We actually get a paper ballot. It's not electronic. They mail us a ballot in November, and the only instructions that it says on the ballot is about 2 lines. And it says you're to look at the player's contributions on the field, and you're supposed to consider his character.
Oh, character. Yes.
How he is. They call it the character clause.
Yes.
How he is as a teammate. Blah 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 blah. Well, which is fine. The character clause was originally written in the 1930s by a commissioner who was racist, who kept worked very hard to keep black players out of the game. So I kind of look at the character clause as, well, this was written a long, long time ago by a guy who wasn't probably a very good character. So how do you look at that? And to me, it's hard for me to say, okay, as a writer, well, you need to figure out the character of these guys. I mean, there's plenty of players in the Hall of Fame who are not good people, were felons and who were had domestic violence issues, who had not just steroid issues, but using drugs and cocaine and everything else. So I don't know that. I mean, I don't look at it and say, well, I need to go out and investigate what kind of character Billy Wagner is. I look at him as players. I treat. I told you guys how I treat the steroid issue. Now, one thing that's interesting, Omar Vizquel was really making his way to the Hall of Fame. He was getting a lot of votes. And then he had 2 very serious domestic violence charges against him at that time. A lot of writers have stopped voting for him. So it's a tricky thing. You can break out the character clause anytime you want, but at the same time, we don't have the resources. I don't have the resources to investigate what they're doing off the field. So to some degree, I think that's kind of an overstated thing that we're looking at character. I think most of us are looking at what they were as baseball players.
Right.
I'm just curious, since we're on the subject of controversial Hall of Fame votes, what was your vote on Pete Rose?
Well, see, Pete Rose never got on the ballot. He's never been on the writer's ballot. He was
Okay.
banned from baseball for gambling, and he's never been on the ballot. So there's only 2 guys, Julius Joe Jackson and Pete Rose. So I never had an opportunity to vote for Pete Rose, and he's never been on the ballot.
Would you?
No, I wouldn't, because since I've been covering baseball, the first thing you see when you walk into a baseball clubhouse is a giant sign in English, Spanish, and Japanese that says you cannot gamble on the game, and that if you gamble on the game, you will be banned from baseball. It's very, very clear. And you can talk about steroids, you can talk about all these other different things that have happened in baseball, but if you have gambling, and if the players are involved in gambling on baseball, as a fan, you would walk into the park and wonder, is this game fixed? And if people start walking into parks wondering if the game is fixed, the game is done. So that's why they have such a strict rule about it. Pete Rose knew the rule. He saw it every day. He gambled on it. He lied about it. He lied about it for a long, long time. Then he decided he could make more money by not lying about it, so he told the truth. He made his own bet. I have very little sympathy for Pete Rose.
All right, we're talking to Peter Abraham of the Boston Globe. We invite your phone calls at 774-301-9432. We thank Rosemary Castro, Bruce David, Scott Bryant for looking in this morning and typing in the comment line. We also enjoy that as well. I want to talk to you a little bit about the ratings over there in baseball. You look at the World Series in 1986. A few youngins out there, that's the famous Bill Buckner year where all of us Red Sox fans had heart attacks at the same hour. So that goes 1986. You look at the ratings then and the ratings now, and the ratings have dropped off. You look at the NFL, while they're doing just about everything right, it seems. Then they talk about speed of the game. All our attention spans, because of our iPhone, have just spent to the point where this 100 and some odd year old game just doesn't fit into the way we work now. We're always doing things at 100 miles an hour, always multitasking. Are there changes to the game that you support, being around the game and being so knowledgeable about the game?
Yeah, there are changes that I support. I think they need to improve the pace of the game. The game needs to move at a quicker pace. There's too much downtime between outs. The ball is not in play enough. When the ball is in play, the game is interesting. You're watching the field. You're waiting to see what's going to happen. There's not enough stolen bases. That's a very exciting play. But now everybody's afraid to steal a base because it's not a good percentage play. So there's a lot of things they could change. They could put a pitch clock on the pitchers to make them work faster. They could ban certain shifts so that there's not as many outs. They could change, don't let every team have an unlimited amount of pitchers. Have a certain number of pitchers. That way a starting pitcher has to go deeper in the game and the pitchers aren't overwhelming the game. Right now, when you watch baseball, the pitchers are so good that basically 3 things happen. It's either a strikeout or a walk or somebody grounds into a shift. There's really not a lot of, not as much action as there used to be. You don't see how athletic the players are like you used to. So Theo Epstein is on, working with Major League Baseball to try to fix this. There's a lot of people that are talking about what to do. I do think that in the coming years, you're going to see a lot of changes to try to improve how the game is played. I don't favor radical changes. I don't think it should be a 7-inning game, things like that. But I do think there's things you can do on the field to improve how the game looks to fans and make it more appealing to fans.
All right.
Peter, what do you think from maybe an umpiring perspective that they could do in their eyes to also speed up the game? I think sometimes players don't get in the box that fast anymore. They take their time going up to the plate. You got the music playing. A lot of things happen. What else could the umpires do maybe to help this game?
Yeah, if you had a pitch clock and you said, okay, you have to throw the ball by a certain amount of time, the umpire can say to the batter, hey, you need to be in the box because this guy's going to throw a ball, in 5 seconds, this guy's going to pitch. So, yeah, that I think if you had a pitch clock, that would force everybody to work at a quicker pace. The umpires don't want to the umpires want to enforce the rules. The umpires don't want to enforce sort of the attraction of the game. They don't look at that as that's their job. They look at it more like we're trying to enforce the rules. And if we start yelling at somebody, hey, you gotta pick it up, the manager is not going to like that. And I think the other thing that's going to happen with the umpires, and it's probably going to happen in the next 5 years, is the balls and strikes are going to be called by a system, and the umpire will have an earpiece, and he's going to say ball or strike depending on what he's told to call. And I think that will help things because a lot of umpires have their own strike zones, and what's a strike on Tuesday is not a strike on Wednesday. And so I think that's something that eventually they want to try to get to, and they're testing that in the minor leagues. I don't know if it's ever going to be where they feel good enough about putting it in the big leagues, but they're trying like heck to make sure they're trying to do that, and that'll be another thing that'll be interesting if that ever happens.
They're trying it in the minor leagues. I heard that the other day for the first time, a robot, and the umpire is still going to be there with the earpiece because you still need the human being there. He's still going to make the call, if there's a play at home plate and stuff like that. And at first I thought, wow, that's kind of an interesting idea, but I kind of like it because you're right, the inconsistency. And sometimes you watch a game and you're just, I don't know, for a reason, umpire just rings a guy up and the pitch is like 6 inches off the outside of the plate, and everybody knows it. Everybody in the stadium knows it. Everybody at home knows it. Everybody can see the little box. And it's like, you want some consistency there. So I do think that is a big thing. And then you can also make the strike zone big or small, speed the game up too. You could factor that in how you can speed up the game.
Well, if you call the strike zone with how it's written in the book, it would speed things up because there'd be more strikes called. And it's, I've seen this in person. When pitchers are getting ready for the game, they have scouting reports on umpires that this guy will call the outside curveball, this guy will call the high fastball, this guy won't call, a certain slider or whatever it might be. And they cater their pitching to how this umpire is going to call the game. That would almost be like saying, well, if this referee in the NFL is calling the game, 9.5 yards is okay for a first down. But if this guy's calling it, you kind of got to go 10.5. I mean, you should have the same strike zone. And if they can figure out a way to do that, that would probably be a good thing.
But on that one too, Peter, if an umpire is behind a plate and he makes the call, and then he has something in the ear saying this, so now it takes away from he's the one that's making the call, and it's somebody else upstairs making the call. Is that going to be kind of controversy?
Well, it would be. When you go to parks, there's radar guns and all of these different things behind the plate, and that's how they measure everything. Yeah. So they would have a system that would determine if it was a ball or a strike, right? And the umpire would get, I don't know what it would be, like a buzz in his ear, whatever it would be, to say it was a strike. So it wouldn't be a person; it would be, this machine, So he would, it would happen pretty quickly. It wouldn't take a time. It would happen as soon as the pitch crossed the plate, and then he would say, strike.
Yep.
And the umpire would call, plays at the plate and foul tips and all that kind of stuff. But just in terms of the strike zone, pitches that were taken, the radar, the devices that they have, that would determine strikes. So,
do you ever think there could be like a video challenge on a specific strikeout?
No.
In the game.
That would really slow the game down if you had challenges. Yeah, it really would. So that's why they would need to get this system, perfect. And that's why they're trying it out in the minor leagues. They're going to have it in AAA on the West Coast this year. They tried it in, I think it was in Single A last year. So if they can get it to a point where everybody agrees it works, then I think they'll try it.
Now, do you agree with the one at first base? If they make it out, now they stop, they go inside, they put their headsets on, they talk about it, and then they call them out of safe. Do you still believe in that and take out the human factor?
Well, see, I do think there should be replay, but it's gotten out of hand. Yeah. I think replay should only be for a really egregiously missed call. Like the play. The reason they have replay is because that blown call at first base that cost the Tigers pitcher is no hitter. Yes. That's why they have replay. It was such a terrible call. Everybody said, we got to have replay. Now you have replay for a guy slides into second base. The shortstop holds his glove on the guy's leg. The guy goes to get up off the base, and he's off the base by this much, and they go, "That's it, you're out." That's not what replay was designed for. Replay was designed for the really blown, terrible mistake. Now, every manager has challenges, and I think a lot of times they use these challenges just to use them because they're going to run out of them anyway.
Yep.
I think they should have another umpire at the game in the booth, and if there's a really terribly missed call, he can say, "Hey, we need to look at this one again." It should only happen rarely, and it shouldn't be something where everybody's standing there waiting for these guys to get on the headsets and call back to New York, and it should be something that happens once in a while, not all the time.
I totally agree with you there, because I think it's gotten out of hand and it kind of taken off from it. But, that being said, too, and obviously trying to speed up the game of baseball, is there anything else in your mind that you would say, hey, this isn't a bad idea, maybe they should think, or that you've heard of besides what you've just said, might be some other things in the future coming up to speed the play, or just regular rules in general?
Yeah, well, I thought some of the stuff they did during the pandemic, I think it should be part of the game going forward. I think having the runner on second base when you start the 10th inning or the 11th inning and extra innings makes sense, because a lot of times, and I speak from experience, when you have a long game, when a game goes 16 innings or whatever, the next day they have to make roster changes because they need a new pitcher. Both teams are wiped out. The next game usually isn't played as well because both teams are beaten up. I think if you got the game over quickly in extra innings, a lot of people would benefit. And people say, "Oh, fans, you want to see the whole game." Trust me, when it goes past the 11th inning, everybody leaves. There's very few people left in the stands once it gets past the 10th or 11th inning. So I think that rule is a good rule. And then I also don't think that having I think they should have doubleheaders scheduled like once a month. Every team should play a home doubleheader. And I think if those games were 7-inning doubleheaders, that would be fine. I think there's certain things you could do that would try to get people to bring their kids to the game and not have games go 4.5 hours because nobody can score a run in the 17th inning or whatever. I think if you got rid of some of that kind of stuff, every other sport has some kind of sudden death overtime,
right?
Except for baseball. So if you figure out a way to make it, don't let games drag on and ruin the rest of the week for both teams, I think that would be fine.
All right. I was just going to say 774-301-9432. We got a few people commenting in over here. So we usually have our regular callers. Yes. So they must be shoveling snow this morning or something. I don't know. Don't do that, because if you're not used to it, that can take a difficult turn. You talk about the pitch clock, right? And I'm thinking, make them throw the ball. If you're not in the batter's box, hey, you call a strike. That's it. No more getting out of the batter's box and all that. But again, right, when there's runners on base, you can't do it. So how much faster? I mean, it would speed it up a little bit, but we have these games sometimes 4.5, 5 hours, and then you watch a hockey or basketball game is 2.5 hours. When it's going to end. It does seem like it's so far beyond what you really want it to be that you're going to need more than a couple of tweaks here and there.
Yeah, I think the pitch clock would be a start, and then some of the other things they're talking about. I think you just need to have the ball in play. I mean, when you watch some of those Red Sox games last year in the postseason, the games against the Nationals, the final weekend of the season, the wild card game against the Yankees. Nobody cared about how long the game was going because it was entertaining games. If the ball's in play, if guys are making plays, if the pitchers are working faster, I don't think it necessarily matters how long it is. It's how compelling it is. The games that you notice are long are the games that are boring games. So I think that would go a long way to fixing things. Just getting the ball, having players running around, the defense making plays, that would be more interesting.
Paul, I thought Peter said it very interesting just a little while ago about all the pitches now that are being used where starters are not going 7 and 8 like they used to, only going 4 or 5. Some guys are only going 2 or 3 like Tampa Bay, and they keep rotating and switching. And now you're using maybe a pitcher for one guy, and then you're using a pitcher for another guy because you have so much depth in that bullpen, and it takes a long time to get the guy out of there, warm him up, get him on the field, get his throws in, and then start again, which makes the game obviously go longer. So I think that's a great point on Peter. I don't know how they can fix that, but in today's game, that's the way that it's going. But if, Peter, you have any suggestions on that, please chime in on it.
No, here's how you fix it. You have fewer pitchers. You tell teams they can only have 12 pitchers. And if you tell teams they can only have 12 pitchers, then the starter has to go longer because otherwise you're going to wipe out the bullpen. Now, when I first started covering baseball on an everyday basis in 2002, relievers weren't that good. They were just guys who couldn't start, and they were, they would come into the game. Now relievers come in, and there's two things with every reliever. They either throw 100 or they have an off-speed pitch you can't hit. And they come in the game and they wipe out the next three guys. And if you made the starting pitcher work deeper into games, two things would happen. The game would be quicker because there'd be fewer pitching changes, and relievers wouldn't be so dominant. Now, you used to wake up on a Saturday and say, look at the paper and say, oh man, Roger Clemens is facing, Roy Halladay. I want to go watch that game. Now it doesn't matter who starts because they're out of the game so fast. Nobody gets to it. It used to be like a holiday when Pedro Martinez pitched for the Red Sox, right? Everybody would know about it. You want to watch that game because Pedro's pitching for the Red Sox. Does that happen anymore? It really doesn't. And you need to get back to that where the starting pitcher is a big deal. We want to go see this guy. And now it's not really like that. And I think that takes a lot away from the game.
Could you see MLB making that clause?
Well, that's one of the things they're talking about. They would cut down the number of pitchers on the team, and that you wouldn't be able to just have a parade of relievers every day. You would have to rely on your starter.
Well, one of the things that I notice, like when I go to the game, right, they'll say, well, fans want to see home run, chicks dig the long ball and all that stuff, right? So when I'm at the game, I kind of want to see, a lot of action, home runs, you said you got to get the doubles and stealing bases and all that in there. But when I'm home, I love a pitcher's duel. I like because when you're at home, you got the center field camera and it's zoomed in and you can watch the pitcher work and pitch to pitch, But whether you're there or whether you are at home, that old-fashioned pitcher's duel was something that used to be a real big thing, just like you said. And if you could bring that back, that would bring the scores down a little bit, somewhere between, the worship of offense that we even see in the NFL and so forth, and the idea that you want the game to go 3 hours and 15 minutes, somewhere in between there. There's got to be a happy medium. And, they talk about the shift. I mean, if you say that you can't do the shift, that'll help put some points up on the board, but it'll also make the game longer too. So you got to weigh the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to how young players are developed because coming up, guys used to play games, right? And then that's how they learn how to play. Now it's all showcase stuff. Hitters are trying to hit home runs. Pitchers are trying to throw as hard as they can. So as teams draft pitchers, they're not capable of going 7 innings. So they change how they play. Okay, well, this guy's only going to go 4. Then we'll bring in this guy. They need to make these changes so that it forces players. If you want to succeed in baseball, you need to be able to go 7 innings. You need to build up your arm strength. If you want to succeed in baseball, you need to be able to, run the bases well. You need to be able to, be more than just a home run hitter. You need to be able to hit the opposite field. You need to, find a way to defeat the shift. Now, I see so many players come up and hitters can do one thing. They can hit home runs. And pitchers can do one thing. They can throw really hard. You don't see like the complete players as much anymore. And I think that's something too that, they need to, make the rules in such a way that it encourages, young players, college players, high school players to be more complete players. And that would improve the game on the major league level. Not right away, but in time, it definitely would.
And even not much small ball out there too, Peter, not much bunting, stealing, as you said a little bit earlier too. That seems to be like a lost art because everybody from batter 1 through batter 9 are getting to want to hit that long ball because it looks like, they want to see more runs on the board instead of a 1-0 game, 2-1. They're looking for 8 7s and 10 6s. So they're looking for more excitement out there. As much as the NFL tries to do that a little bit to see the NFL get a lot of points on the board because they think the fans want to see that more than a pitching duel.
Well, let me ask you guys something. What's the most important play in Red Sox history? The most important play.
Go ahead, Paul. I'll start with you.
Well, let's see. There's a few. There's the Ed Ambrista play. There's the Carlton Fisk home run. There's the 2000. What's that?
Probably Ortiz.
No, to me, the most important play in Red Sox history is Dave Roberts stole second base.
Oh, well, absolutely. 100. I was working my way to 2004.
Yeah.
I should have started there.
Right. Dave Roberts stole second base and everything changed, right? They went on to beat the Yankees. They won the World Series. Everything changed.
Yep.
Nowadays, they wouldn't let Dave Roberts try to steal second base. They would wait for somebody to hit a home run.
Yeah.
Now, and that's what's different. Back then, every team, you had to have a guy who could, when you needed a second base, some second base stolen, you went out and got a Dave Roberts. Now teams are like, well, we don't do that. We wait for somebody to hit a home run, and that's how, to me, that's what's missing. You want to have the action.
We're talking to Peter Abraham of the Boston Globe, a New Bedford native who's been covering the Red Sox and baseball for a number of years up there in Boston. We do have somebody watching right now that we like to call Mr. Guarantee. The reason why we call him Mr. Guarantee is because he guaranteed a Patriots win against Buffalo in the playoffs, and he hasn't called us ever since. So if you give us a call, we're not going to harp on you too much. Ask a question to Peter Abraham, make a comment. We are going to circle around the football in just a couple of minutes, but we just want to follow up with the baseball. So, Peter, when you first started, covering games at the national level, whether it was in New York, the Yankees, and, the baseball, the Red Sox, and so forth. Obviously, now with COVID, it's a little bit different, but I know you get, obviously clubhouse access, interacting with a lot of these, big time athletes and stuff like that. Number one, what is that like? And number two, what are these players like? I mean, people kind of look at them and it's almost like we can't relate because they're multi-millionaires. They live on such another level now. It's the private jets. They don't fly with the media anymore. What are these athletes like? Are they like kind of like spoiled and stuff like that? I mean, they're obviously they're human like the rest of us, but what is it that you've observed? What can you tell our audience that perhaps they hadn't thought of, an observation that you've made interacting with these athletes?
Yeah, well, when you're around a baseball team, there's 26 guys on the roster, but there's also, 5 or 6 guys who are around because they're on the disabled list or whatever it may be. Only a very small percentage of those guys make big money. Most baseball players make closer to the minimum wage than the big money because that's just, how it works. So a lot of them are just, they're concerned with staying on the team. They're not guys who are, living like Derek Jeter or David Ortiz or Alex Rodriguez. Now, those guys are there too, but really they're all there for the same purpose, right? They're all trying to win a baseball game. And the one thing, it's a culture where you have to perform to succeed. If you don't play well, eventually they're going to get rid of you. No matter how much you make, they'll find out. They'll pay you off and get rid of you. So there's a lot of pressure to perform. They spend a lot of time getting ready for games. I think people sometimes think they show up and they get dressed and they go out and play. I mean, I've covered guys who would get to the park at noon for a 7:00 game, and they take batting practice, they watch film. They work out. They take a nap. They have a certain thing that they want to eat. They hit more. There's a lot of things that go into getting ready to games. And I've talked to guys who after night games, they'll say, okay, I'll see you in a few hours. That's how they look at it. Their whole lives are kind of devoted to getting ready for the next game. And I kind of look at it. It's like it's like whatever you do in life. If you walk into a room with 40 people. There's going to be some that you like. There's going to be some that you don't like. There's going to be some that are easy to get along with, some that aren't so easy to get along with. So I think for most, with their interaction with the media, they understand that everybody there has a job to do. Their job is to play. Our job is to cover the games. They understand that there's a reason that we're there to cover the game, that it's good for the game. It's good for them. And some guys, understand that, and they're great to deal with. If you have, you need something, you need some time, they're happy to give it to you. There's other guys that aren't like that, but you figure out a way around it. And I think a lot of people think it's contentious, and it's really not contentious. Every once in a while it is, but for the most part, we're there to do a job, and they understand that. It's part of the deal.
Peter, we've seen Moneyball in the analytics of the game and what Billy Beane brought. How do you see that playing out in today's game? The analytics, because when they didn't have it before, guys showed up, put the uniform on, went out there and played. Now it's about studying and, maybe my arm is here and it should be here or that and all that. How do you bring analytics into the game and what do you see from it?
Yeah, all it really is, I think people look at analytics like it's some terrible thing. It's this awful thing that showed up one day like a monster. It's really not. It's just it's a way of studying the game so that you understand it better. Like when we were all watching baseball as young guys, right? There were basically 3 statistics for a hitter: batting average, home runs, and RBIs. Right? That's what you looked at. Well, batting average really doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot when you think about it. On base percentage means a lot more than batting average because what's important? It's important to get to first base. Doesn't matter if you got a hit or if you got a walk. No, it doesn't. You want to get to first base. RBIs are a pretty good stat, but RBIs are also contingent on what did the guy in front of you do? Did he get on base? If you play for a team where the guy in front of you never gets on base, well, you're probably not going to drive in a whole lot of runs. So you start looking at slugging percentage. That makes a lot of sense because you're figuring out who has power. When you look at a pitcher, like to me, when I first started writing about baseball, I would always write, okay, this pitcher is now 7-0. That's his record. There's really almost like there couldn't be a stat that is more overrated than a pitcher's win, because half the time it has nothing to do with how he pitched. You can go 9 innings and give up 1 run and take a loss. You could go 5 innings and give up 6 runs and get a win. So you would say, oh, this guy's got 20 wins. Well, he must be great. Well, he's probably pretty good because it's hard to get 20 wins. But there could be a guy who went 13-11 who had a heck of a year. He just didn't get a lot of run support. His defense was terrible. Right. So analytics allows us to understand these things and that not to look at, okay, well, this guy hit 305. He must be a pretty good player. Well, no, the guy who hit 286 but hit for more power, he's actually a lot better player. Right. So, that I think that's all analytics is. It allows you to understand what's going on better than we could 20 years ago. And I think if you fight it, you're never going to win, because like any other industry, baseball's trying to be more, understand better how to be successful. And that's true of every industry in the world compared to 20 years ago. So, why would sports be any different? Really, that's really all it comes down to.
Well, you mentioned the on-base percentage statistic, and years ago, before it was even popular, I always thought to myself, that really is an underrated statistic, because I remember like Nomar, he would never take a walk. He'd swing at the first pitch every time. So his batting average would be, 300, and his on-base percentage would be 310. Then there'd be another guy batting like 285, but the on-base percentage would be 385 because this guy works the count and grinds the pitcher down and all that. So I say to myself, hey, there's an argument to be made that the 285 guy might actually be more valuable than the 300 batting guy, right?
Well, and then look at the save. Right, the save drives me crazy. The save is like the dumbest stat. Like you could come into a game. You could come into a game with a 5-2 lead, and you face the last 3 guys in the order. Oh, this guy gets a save. Terrific. What is that? It has nothing to do with anything. You can pitch the last 3 innings of the game, and your team's up by 10 runs. Oh, he gets a save, and then the guy comes in the 8th inning with the bases loaded and strikes out. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Well, he doesn't get anything, that guy. But then the next guy comes in, he gets a save. And then, to me, it's like, I feel like I need to put it in the paper because, it's sort of a traditional thing. But I also try to mix in some other stats too, Absolutely. Because I think people have to look beyond the ones that we grew up with, because a lot of times they don't really tell you much.
We have a question here from the comment line from Mike Kudo from the great Kudo and Mulligan combination, watching from Florida. He's got to be in Florida, kind of looking up in New England and going, good luck with that. But Mike's got a question. What does Peter Abraham think about putting a man on second base to start the extra innings?
Yeah, we talked about that before. I think it's good. I mean, I think they should wait till the 11th inning, not the 10th inning. But I think it's great because it gets the game over with. And if you ask every player and manager, man, they loved it. They loved it because there's nothing worse than those extra inning games that nobody can figure out a way to win, and it goes all night. There's nobody in the stands, and then both teams show up the next day dragging, and that ruins the next day's game. So yeah, I think it's great. I thought it was one of the best things they've come up with in the last few years.
Should the game end in a tie in the regular season?
No tie, no tie.
I really hit a soft spot for a baseball.
Imagine that,
Exactly.
Okay, how would I write about that? Red Sox tie Twins,
No, I totally agree. Peter, what do you think about this year's team? I know right now with the lockout, what's going on, and hopefully it all gets back. But what do you see from this year's Red Sox team that you dislike? Maybe a little prediction. What you think of the players, coaches, and how it's going to look rolling forward for them.
Yeah, well, they got a whole year of Chris Sale, which will be a good thing.
Yep.
And they know what they have in Garrett Whitlock, who kind of was a surprise guy last year. He could end up being a starter. Nate Eovaldi is certainly a top guy in terms of a starter. I think their rotation's in pretty good shape. Offensively, they probably need another right-handed hitter to balance out that lineup. Xander Bogaerts is obviously very good. They've got excellent JD Martinez. They've got really good offensive players. They probably need one other guy, a right-handed hitter who can play some outfield. and work him into the lineup. Certain times, certain situations. Rafael Devers. They've got good guys offensively, and they've got guys coming up from the farm system. Tristan Casas, who's a big, strong lefty hitting first baseman, he's making his way up. I think they feel that Jaron Duran, learned a lot from being kind of overmatched last year when he got called up, but he can be a factor. So I think offensively they're going to score runs. When the lockout ends, the second the lockout ends, you're going to see every team trying to scramble for relief pitchers. Right. Most teams need relief pitchers, and the Red Sox are among them.
Yep.
So you're going to see a lot of action in the first 72 hours after the lockout as teams scramble to get relievers.
So the core of the Red Sox are pretty much intact. It's about finding some role players to go with that core, number one. And then number two, what do you see as, I know it's not your favorite, but who's your closer and maybe some saves, or the Red Sox really need to find someone for that?
Yeah, well, I guess you got to kind of look at Matt Barnes and say, well, he was terrific, right? He made the All-Star team. He was pitching great. They wore him out. That was the problem. They used him too much. They thought that Ottavino would be more of a factor. He wasn't, and they need to get somebody, whether it's Tanner Houck or whether it's Garrett Whitlock, somebody else who they can trust late in games, because too many times they were bringing in Barnes in the 8th inning and then he was pitching the 9th inning. And basically they wore him out. If Matt Barnes shows up in spring training and he looks like all-star Matt Barnes, then fine. He's the closer. But they can't. They got to be careful with how they use him. They don't want to get to a point again where in July he's his arm's hanging. So
did it turn into a mental issue with him?
Well, I think it was the fact that he was worn out, and then they're in the pennant race. So he's he's trying to come back, and he wants to win, and so I think that was he needed the rest, and at some point he was like, okay, 2 days later he was like, okay, I'm fine, put me back in, and then he get hit hard again, so it was as much a mental thing, but it was all triggered by getting worn out, Yep.
All right, let's go to the phones. Good morning. You are on with Peter Abraham of the Boston Globe.
Good morning, everybody. Mark Sylvia from Chicago. How you all doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. It's Mr. Guarantee. I'm sorry, I let that slip out.
Hey, I'll tell you what, Chris and a bunch of our friends like to call me the Mush. If you're not familiar with him, he was from the movie The Bronx Tale, and he's kind of like a cooler type guy. So that's me.
All right. What you have a question for Peter?
Well, I got a lot to say about baseball. There's a couple questions in there, but listen, I grew up watching every single Red Sox game as a kid into my adult life. My grandmother watched every game. We'd be up till 1 a.m. watching the West Coast trip, and my kids play baseball today. But I'll tell you, I can't watch baseball. The games are so long, they're boring. It's strikeout, home run. You got again living out here now in Chicago. You got Javi Baez, who he'll hit 30 home runs and strike out 280 times. And there's so much a pet peeve for me is the pitchers. And when you've got, I think Joe Madden started this when he was with Tampa. The guy coming in, the specialist, pitches to one batter and he comes out. You'll watch a game where there'll be 3 or 4 pitchers in one inning, and you're just sitting there going, oh, my God, get this thing going. Maybe the guy doesn't have as many warm-up pitches when he comes in. I don't know.
Right.
I like the idea of reducing the bullpen, but I question, how does the players' union handle that? Because you're going to have guys losing jobs, and I think that'll be a problem. But,
all right.
We talk about this too, Chris and I and our friends, is in the playoffs, these guys get so cute. The best chance you got to win is with your best pitcher on the mound. And in the playoffs, you'll have your number one starter, and he gets into trouble in the 3rd inning, and you yank him.
Yeah, right.
And I'm going, why?
Right, we talked about that. Well, a lot to unpack there. Let's get Peter's response.
Well, they do have a rule where a pitcher comes in the game, he has to face 3 hitters. So they have cut down on how many pitching changes there are. So I don't know that I personally think that that's fixed it. It certainly hasn't fixed it, but it has cut down on how many pitching changes there are.
It does seem like, we need more than a tweak here or a tweak there, though, because I hear that all the time when Mark says, that
Oh yeah.
There's a long stretch of time there that it is boring, especially when you get to the fourth, fifth, sixth inning.
Yeah.
And I'm at the game. I'm a big fan. I grew up at the game and all that. And I don't know. I think it's the iPhone. I think has changed our brain or something. Like we want everything to go faster, and it really baseball is a game that you have to sit there and watch it pitch by pitch to really enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's why MLB hired Theo Epstein as a consultant to work with them about let's figure out a way to fix this. And Theo said he's part of the problem because as a general manager, he did things that slowed down the game. He focused on ways to win that slowed down the game. And he said it's all of their responsibilities. They got to win, right? That's why you hire a general manager to win the game. But they also need to start thinking, we're custodians of the game. We need to figure out a way to make this game better. Or, eventually, what's the point of doing this if nobody's going to want to be interested in watching,
Any final thought there, caller?
Well, you got a couple other things to that is, we talk about replays and, I think baseball, there's that unwritten rules, which another aspect of the game I can't stand, but you institute replay in baseball, but yet you got the neighborhood play at second base. On the double plays, I don't know, 80% of the time, the shortstop or the second baseman doesn't even tag second base. You could call that play every game.
All right,
So,
all right.
What replay or are you?
All right, what does Peter think about the neighborhood play?
Well, they've taken that out. They've told you that you can't. You need to touch the bag. So that's something that they've. There's a lot of like that kind of like, well, everybody, this has been going on for years. Let's just keep doing it. They've tried to get rid of a lot of that stuff with rules, and they've kind of taken out the neighborhood play. But part of the reason how they've done it is you can't destroy the shortstop anymore on it with a slide. They took that out too. So yeah, there's things they're trying to do to fix it. It's just it takes a while for it to all come together and work at the same time.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you very much for calling. Don't be a stranger. We're going to move on to some football because Peter Abraham is also a season ticket holder of the Patriots. So we want to get his thoughts on that. But thank you very much for calling, and don't be a stranger.
Okay. Hey, by the way, KC and the Niners, if you wanted to know. Have a good day, guys.
that means do the opposite, I think.
There you go.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So Peter Abraham, Boston Globe, mainly a baseball guy, but we wanted to talk football. Obviously, we got the two big games, Cincinnati at Kansas City, San Francisco at the Los Angeles Rams. The first question, before we get to the games, and we'll talk about the games, of course, we want your opinion, but, that last weekend, I think I was a bigger baseball and hockey fan over my lifetime than I was a football fan. But in the last few years, I got to tell you, I think I enjoy football more now than these other sports. That was unbelievable. Can these other sports like baseball or hockey or basketball compete with something like that? I mean, that was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, what happened with the NFL this last week and what's coming up this week?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a guy in the New York Times who wrote a column, and he was saying, football has a lot of problems, right? Concussions and all of these different things that it makes you a little uneasy about watching football. Some of the things you hear about. And then you watch those games and you're like, well, who cares about that? These are the greatest games I've seen in a long time. So yeah, football sucks you in. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we had those great games last weekend. And the next thing you know, they're making progress on the lockout with baseball. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think baseball people were like, man, holy crap, we better get ourselves straightened out, because if we don't, we're going to become, lacrosse compared to football if we don't get this straightened out,
Yeah, and speaking of that too, Paul and Peter, my brother works in the media, and he was letting me know some breaking news that it looks like TB12 is going to announce his retirement pretty soon. So it might be some breaking news. So don't be surprised if that's happening, sometime this week.
What would that be like there, Peter? You're a season ticket holder of the Patriots. You've got to see some great games over the year with TB12. And I think that we kind of get spoiled as fans. We think that something's going to go on forever. And this guy just adds 1 more year, 2 more years, 1 more year, 2 more years. He said he wanted to play to 45. And then all of a sudden, boom, he might go. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe, we enjoyed it, but we kind of thought it was never going to end.
Yeah, I look at Brady the first games I went to were at the old stadium with my dad, and we sat in the south end zone. It was, such a terrible stadium. The traffic was brutal. It was like it would wipe you out to go to a Patriots game. Like it was like a physical challenge, And so Tom Brady, to me, doesn't owe me a thing. He walks on water. He changed everything for the Patriots. Yep. The new stadium, everything. It's so great. as a Patriots fan, they don't owe me a thing. I mean, that's how I look at it. And he should do whatever Tom Brady should do whatever Tom Brady wants to do. I don't think nobody, he doesn't know the NFL anything.
He doesn't. And as not a fan, Peter, as I'm a Cowboy fan, he's got nothing more to prove in my eyes. He's done it all. He's going to be called the GOAT forever right now, unless someone does major more. He's got nothing more to prove. If he walks out tomorrow, you just go like this with your hands and say, what a tremendous and great career it was for him.
Yeah, I mean, best quarterback ever, no question about it. Most important player, and then if whatever you want to say, he should do whatever he wants. If he wants to go spend time with his family, God bless him. That's what he should do. Yeah.
One of the disadvantages I think baseball, hockey, and basketball have compared to football is like a seventh game every time, right? It's a single elimination. You schedule it, you win, you lose, you win, you go, you're out, you lose, you're out, right? Whereas baseball and hockey and basketball have to kind of evolve. You play this day, play that day, play that day. And, it's a seventh game. Oh my God, it's a seventh game. In football, every single time you meet in the playoffs, it's a seventh game. It's made for TV.
Well, it's funny you say made for TV because I mean I like going to the games. I like the social aspect of it. I like going to the game. Football is the greatest sport to watch on television because you see everything, the way the angles are now and everything. It's when you watch from home, it's like you said, it's how long it's going to be. It's a great experience. Football is like it's like a good movie. There's going to be a beginning. There's going to be an end. You know what's going to happen, and you walk away happy.
I want to ask you. They've done that with the baseball too, Paul. Where sometimes you have to have that one game to get into the playoffs. It really makes it exciting in baseball when it comes down to that, especially if it's like a Red Sox versus Yankees, one game to say, hey, I'm moving on and you're out. So it is thrilling in that pot.
I never heard Fenway Park as loud and excited as it was for that. That was better than any World Series game.
Sure was.
Now that was because it was the Yankees for sure.
True.
But Fenway Park was on fire that night, and a lot of people say, "Oh, baseball's dying, baseball's dying." Well, go to Fenway Park for that game and tell me baseball's dying.
That one game, absolutely.
Man, the place was like it was like a buzzing energy for 3 hours. It was great. Yeah.
Right. I'm kind of a Red Sox guy, so I don't spend a lot of time watching like other teams, around. But I got to tell you, the wild card game, whether it's the Red Sox or not, I always watch the wild card game because the wild card game is the closest thing to that. This is going to be this one game. They have to throw everything at the other team. They have to put the ace in there. They got to use the middle relief. They got to use the closer. They got to do everything they can to win that game. It's the closest thing to, like a football game, really.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, that, and they're expanding. They're talking about expanding the playoffs so that the first rounds, there'll be a series of wild card games, which would be, that'll be good for baseball, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I hope that works out. Peter, I'm going to go back to the Hall of Fame real quick on your last thought on that. Next Red Sox player that might make the Hall of Fame in your eyes?
Well, that's a good question because there's really nobody right away who's obvious. Right? And, John Lester's going to get on the ballot. He's got a chance. Dustin Pedroia is going to get on the ballot in a few years. His career was cut short, so that's going to be a difficult one for him.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it's if Lester gets in, he might want to go in as a Cub, even though he played more games for the Red Sox. Xander Bogaerts is putting together a terrific career for a shortstop. He's one of the best hitting shortstops, in the last 20 years. So he's a guy, but he needs to play a lot longer. Chris Sale has kind of had a Hall of Fame career, but the injuries kind of derailed that to some degree. So yeah, there's not one obvious guy. There really isn't that you say, okay, this guy's clearly a Hall of Famer. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of develops.
During the course of your career, I know you've been on the field and at unbelievable games over the years, great moments that, obviously you're working and you have a job to do, but the enjoyment of being at a particular game, a big moment that you got to witness firsthand. Can you give us the top, 2 or 3 moments that you say, wow, that was just unbelievable that I was able to be that close to that situation?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. I covered UConn basketball before I got into baseball. And when UConn beat Duke in the 1999 championship game, I was right courtside, first row. That was a great thing because I had covered UConn when they were terrible, and to see them, come up the way they did under Jim Calhoun and win the championship, that was tremendously exciting. I also covered the last game at Old Yankee Stadium when I was covering the Yankees, and the Yankees weren't in the playoffs that year, but covering the last game at Old Yankee Stadium, that was really a special thing. And then the other one that I remember was the grand slam David Ortiz hit against the Tigers in the ALCS to tie that game. And I was sitting in the press box at Fenway Park, and the press box started to shake because the crowd was going so crazy. You could feel the press box moving. And at first I was thinking, wow, this is kind of cool. The press box is moving. And then I was like, oh shit, the press box is moving. Like, I hope like this isn't gonna, something bad's gonna happen here. And that was a cool thing, just being in Fenway Park for, that such a great moment, and a lot of times it's not, the things you remember aren't necessarily the big World Series game or whatever. It's just certain crazy things that happen in a game and, stuff like that. So yeah, I've got memories from covering, high school games when I was younger and, different things like that, are special to me even now.
I got a quick story on that. It's only about 20 seconds. I'm watching that game, right? A big Red Sox fan. And my son is a high school kid, and he's downstairs playing video games during that game, So David Ortiz comes up with the bases loaded, trailing 6-2. So I go to the top of the stairs and I say, Andrew, you have to come up because David Ortiz is up with the bases loaded. Yeah. And if he hits a grand slam, the game's tied. You know what I mean? You got to come up here and see this. So he's like, okay. So he paused the video game and he came upstairs and he freaking hits the grand slam. I mean, that he is the most clutch player, I think, in the history of Major League Baseball.
Well, I mean, I was, I didn't cover his whole career, but I was fortunate to cover a lot of his career. And it was almost like there were so many times, like, just figure out a way to get somebody on base and David will make it happen, and I understand, he has that, the allegation that he used steroids and everything else, but there's no drug that you can take that can make you better in that situation, right? That's just having the, the ability to focus on what's going on at that time. And he had that ability. I mean, he just, nothing fazed him, no matter what the crowd was doing, who the pitcher was, he had that ability to really focus and do what he had to do.
Well, it's a quick hour here with Peter Abraham. I did want to get his prediction on the games tomorrow. Yep. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow? Who do you like in those two championship games?
Well, it's hard not to like Kansas City. I mean, the way they looked, that was incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. And, there's something about the 49ers. It doesn't make sense. Jimmy Garoppolo's not playing that great, but their defense has been really good. I don't know. The 49ers feel like a Cinderella team, and I think they might find a way to win.
All right.
I like that. They've found ways to win even when Jimmy has looked really bad. Yeah. They've beaten the Rams twice already, so it's not like they got a fear of them. But I think it comes down to, personally for me, Matt Stafford. It's in his hands. The Rams went out and got him for a reason to say, hey, Goff couldn't do it. This is the guy that's going to do it. I think there's a lot of pressure on Matt Stafford to win this game. Yeah. And San Fran is very fast on defense, and I think they're going to come after him. And it's going to come down to what he does in those key situations, as like bases loaded with David T's up at bat. Matt's going to have to find a way to make sure he makes plays and doesn't turn the ball over.
Now, are you guys in Fall River?
New Bedford.
New Bedford. Okay. Because I was going to tell you a kind of a funny story. When I was working for the Standard Times,
yeah,
they used to send me. I didn't cover when I was young. I didn't cover like the big games. I would cover like different games, and we used to cover the Durfee games before they played New Bedford. So to kind of get ready for the New Bedford Durfee game. So I think I was probably 17, and they sent me to cover a Durfee game, and Durfee lost, which at the time they didn't really in basketball, which they didn't really do that much of. So I went to go in the locker room to talk to the Durfee coach, Skip Karam, who was like their famous basketball coach. And one of the assistant coaches came over and said, he's not going to want to talk to anybody. They lost the game. So I had to try. So I walked into the locker room and I said, Coach Karam, my name is Peter Abraham. I'm from the Standard Times. Can you give me a minute? And he says, get out of here. I said, oh, okay. So I walk out and then he opens the door to the locker room. And he goes, what did you say your name was? I said, Abraham. And he goes, oh, are you Lebanese? I said, well, yeah, my family's Lebanese. And he goes, all right, get in here. And so I go in and I ask him a couple of questions. He gives me a couple of comments. I go back to the Standard Times, and Buddy Thomas was there. And he says, oh, Durfee lost, huh? I said, yeah. And he goes, oh, I bet Skippy didn't want to talk to you. I said, oh, no, I got quotes. And he goes, you got quotes? And I said, yeah. And so I wrote the story. And they were all very impressed that I managed to get quotes from Skip, but I didn't tell them how it happened. I just, I know what I'm doing. And after that, they used to send me to all the Durfee games. I was the guy who could cover it because the coach would talk to me. So that was my first break in journalism. That I happen to be Lebanese. That's how.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic. We are simultaneously on in New Bedford Guide and Fall River Reporter, so actually you are on in both New Bedford and Fall River. So I had a chance to cover Skippy. Those were great times with the old New Bedford Durfee basketball rivalry.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
it was almost like you're going to a college game.
Yeah, I know that was I you guys were talking about fun things that I've covered. I mean, I still remember covering those games. How much fun it was. Yeah.
Were you there, Peter, during the times of Mike Herron or Chris Herron?
Well, both. Well, no,
Both?
Mike Herron mostly.
Mike mostly.
I saw Chris play when he was in college.
Yep.
Man, Mike Herron came in New Bedford High one time and hit a three and basically flipped off the crowd as he was going back on court. And I remember thinking to myself, like, well, I'm either going to be covering a basketball game or I'm going to be covering the riot that's going to happen. And I mean, it was like, I mean, it was intense. I mean, the crowd was right up against the line, and Michael was a really good high school player. I mean, he wasn't a good college player, but he was a great high school player.
Oh, absolutely.
And oh my goodness, I mean, he's the whole thing. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, and New Bedford was good too. I mean, Eddie Rodriguez, the whole thing, they were really good too. Yeah, I've covered a lot of high school games in my life. I never saw a guy do that. I was like, man, talk about taking your life in your hands. I mean, but that's how Michael was. I mean, Michael didn't care. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. They played last week on a Saturday, and there was a little brawl at the end of the game between these two teams. So the rivalry still lives on.
It's good to see. It's good to see nothing's changed, I guess.
Nothing's changed.
Scott Bryant just typed in high school basketball at its best. No question about it. And, how about that year? They won the state championship, whatever year that was, 88, I think it was. And while they were interviewing Mike Herron, this is while you've just won the state championship, because I'm going to predict 25-0 next year.
Oh yeah.
He was just that kind of guy. And actually that made it colorful,
Yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts, Peter, before we let you go?
No, but I appreciate you guys having me on. It's great to talk about sports. That's one thing it's my job, but I'm really fortunate that I love what I do and I get to watch sports, and always happy to talk about it with people who likes talking about sports. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
No, Peter, we wish you the best, obviously, and hope this lockout ends pretty fast and it gets back to, what it should be. And they have a spring training of some sort, and you can get out there and get it started for you and the Red Sox, and obviously have a great season going into that.
Man, the Globe, we rent a condo in Fort Myers, to cover spring training. And I'm watching it out my window. The snow is piling up on the deck, and I'm like, man, get me to my condo in Fort Myers. Get me to my condo.
That's right.
And it's great to see a guy from New Bedford too up there at the Boston Globe. We had Santos, of course, from down here announcing the games for years. So anytime we see a guy from around here have success, we always enjoy seeing that.
Yeah, we just got one. We got one from Fall River, Peter. We got Brandon Gomes, now the GM of the Dodgers from Fall River.
Yeah, one of the assistant GMs now. Yes. Oh, he's a GM now, right? Yeah,
he's the GM now.
Yeah, he came up with the Rays, and that's where he met Andrew Friedman, and as an executive, he's a young guy. So
he is a young guy. Yeah. Yes, good luck.
So that's a great spot for him. Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, Peter. Thank you again. Stay warm and dry, and hopefully we can catch up again down the road.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, all right, Peter Abraham, sports writer for the Boston Globe. For Chris Santos and Santos on Sports, I'm Paul Santos. We'll talk to you again soon.